This video is sponsored by Alpha Draft, where you can play fantasy, esports, League of Legends, CSGO. You can win lots of money if you're good. There's lots of contests. Last week someone won over $11,000. Now, the topic for today is about the dilemma that I see Gambit Gaming facing right now. And I want to define it because as the season goes on, we're going to get to see how their choices play out in terms of their results. And then where people accord blame, and then what credit they give for certain choices they've made within the meta, within the personnel that they have. Because it's not enough just to look at the results. So first of all, let's just talk about the state Gambit's in. So they lost their first 4 games. They were looking really bad. They were bottom of the league. They've won their last 2. The overall team, the team is Kashad top lane, Diamond Prox jungler, Betsy mid lane, and then the bottom lane is AD carry, Forgiven, and support player Gosu Pepper, formerly Edward. So first and foremost, when you look at this lineup, the real reason why there was any hype surrounding the lineup at all, aside from the fact last season there were periods where Gambit was a good team, they were a solid upset team who maybe could have made a semi-finals, etc. The reason why there was hype around them was because of that little streak they had where they won like the 7 games in a row or so. Diamond Prox was playing phenomenally, particularly when he was playing in Italy. Kashad would have some carry games. But you came into this season, and after the way the playoffs ended, with them getting beaten reasonably, having an underwhelming performance against Unicorns of Love, obviously their IEM performance combined, you look at the lineup they had, Diamond Prox seemed to have fallen off a bit. The main reason to be excited was the addition of Forgiven. Not only the best AD carry in Europe, but the best Western AD carry. The best player, one of the best Western players, period. But AD carry, the best Western AD carry. So he leaves SK Gaming, a team I've known that he could have stayed in if he'd wanted to accept certain conditions. Or maybe he could have even joined a better team, gone to NA. But he chooses to join Gambit. And one of the real reasons why he chooses to join Gambit and why people want to see him join Gambit is because when he was in Copenhagen Wolves, when he first rose up and was really strong, he was playing with Unlimited, who's an okay AD carry, okay support player, serviceable support player. At time can be above average in terms of how he plays, but in general, he's not a star support player in any sense of the word. Then he moved on to SK Gaming, and even though SK Gaming as a team at the time was, at one point in time, maybe the best Western team, the best European team, definitely, they weren't a team that had their strong support player. The support player was considered their weakest player, N-rated, a guy whose brain's excellent, who in the past was a strong support player, but nowadays, not so much, especially not individually and especially not laning. So people wanted to see, what if you put Forgiven with a strong laning support player? So now he could straight up bully every lane, and he could have kill lanes, and he could just be wrecking his lane completely, so that either like forced mismatches in other lanes where he was drawing so much help that you can get something going there. Instead, what we ended up with is he joins Gambit, and here we go, we're pairing him with Edward. Well, there we go. That is literally the prototypical, the epitome of the lane carry support player in European history. We think of his Thresh, we think of his playmaking, his Annie when he came back to Gambit. This is the player that you want, in theory, to have this strong laning phase. It was between him and Vander as to who these like carry support laners would be in Europe. And I guess modern day Cassing, but if you're thinking of more classically over the last couple of years, it was going to be Vander or Edward. So he chooses to go to Gambit and gets Edward. But here's the issue. You look at the way the team seems to be built around Forgiven in Gambit, and you look at the way that the team seems to be playing in Gambit, and it looks to me like they don't build the team around Forgiven. They don't give Forgiven the resources. They don't put Forgiven in a place to be the best player and to succeed. Instead, they've made this other choice. So here's the dilemma that I see them facing. On one hand, they can try and play the meta, as in, first of all, the meta of champions, in terms of what he picks and what other people pick around him. Secondly, they can try and play the meta in terms of which roles are considered to be the strongest right now, what the optimal way to play the game is considered to be. And at the moment, a lot of people would say that's not based around the AD carry. That's a weaker AD carry meta. It's a tank meta in terms of junglers and top laners. Although obviously you can play carry top laners. And so instead, the two choices they seem to be faced with is either you go more towards a team where you're setting Kashad up to be the main carry and he's going to get the majority of the resources and attention and champions, or you can go away from the overall optimal meta that people are seeing at the moment, and you can look at the fact that Forgiven's your best player on paper, regardless of metas, build the team around him, give him the picks he wants, design the team around getting him to succeed, and therefore he will carry the game. At the moment, if I have to guess as an outsider looking at the results, I would say that they're choosing the former. They're choosing to go the Kashad route more towards last splits approach. And obviously I have my qualms about that. And I think the results have also been kind of asking questions about that decision. So I want to go through some of this now. First and foremost, the reason why in terms of overall meta, people would say, okay, maybe it's not the worst idea to go away from Forgiven. Kashad is known as one of the 1v1 top laners that we have in Europe. He's one of the better top laners in Europe. So, okay, let's go towards him. Maybe it's not an AD carry meta, therefore go away from the AD carry. Now, the problem first and foremost here is that that's going to then lead to this idea that, okay, maybe we shouldn't give Forgiven resources to carry. We shouldn't set him up to carry. Instead, we should set up Kashad to carry. Now, first and foremost, when you do this, if you set it up like that, the context of it, you're implying that no matter who the players in any of the roles in your team are, that you're just supposed to look at the overall meta like this and go, right, that's the right way to play. And if you play that way, you'll have more success than any other composition, even specific to your team, depending on who's strong in your team. Well, that doesn't work in many ways at all. Like if there was a meta where people were playing lots of really strong engaged supports, if you had a player who wasn't a strong support player, wasn't strong mechanically at support, I'm thinking obviously of someone like N-rated, it wouldn't make a lot of sense to push him onto those and go that way and then go for super kill lanes bot lane. Because actually it's not going to work very well, it's not going to be optimal for you. It's not even going to be optimal in terms of the overall field, because then other teams who have a similar approach but better personnel there are going to bully you, and you might even play away from the strengths of a player like N-rated who might be better on other champions, might be more comfortable, might be able to do more for the team overall. In terms of how this works in terms of the teams that this meta is working for, you also have to always just make this distinction, which is that don't ever confuse the optimal way overall being best and it just so happening that the team making the most of it has the player in that position anyway who is amazing and can get the most out of it, like some super beast top laner. So okay, if we go over to Liquid and teams like that in NA, so Liquid have Quaz and Dominate. If it's a top-centric meta, yes, that's awesome for Liquid, because they've got Quaz and Dominate who already work together a lot, already were kind of like a twosome in the top lane. Likewise, if you go over to Tip, they already had Rush and Impact doing a lot of work there, and that's who they wanted Rush helping out a lot of the time. It wasn't going to be the bot lane as much. The problem with this is that it doesn't necessarily work even when you look around the world at some of the best players. So look at the other AD carries around the world. Now, I'm not saying just the best ones, but let's just look at AD carries who within their regions are the best. And you will see that the best AD carries in their regions still dominate the game, and in many cases are still, at times, the best player in their team. So if we go over to the Chinese region, we've got Deft, is still far and away the best EDG player. He's the best AD carry maybe in the world, probably, and is definitely still in the Chinese region. Uzi is actually having a very, very good split, despite the fact he's playing champions that weren't supposed to be the carry ones, like Sivir, etc. And again, the team's now, admittedly, the team has now been based more around him. Over in NA, we've got Doublelift and Piglet. Doublelift has great numbers and performances even in their losses. Piglet's doing quite well in some of his stronger games, despite the fact that his team even has that strength over there, but they still give some of the resources to Piglet here, and he does well. So the first thing I'd say about this is you've got to use your best strength. This is one of the things I don't like about the meta. I've kind of expanded there, that I don't like the idea that you just think that because this other team does it, you don't look at, well, who do they have those positions? You go, okay, because that's overall strong, which it may well be, I'm not disputing that you should then think, right, well, even if our best strength's in a totally different area, let's ignore that and go away from that towards what is meta. If you have not only the best AD carry, if the best player in your team is the AD carry, and then the best player in your region is the AD carry, and the best player in the whole West is your AD carry, it doesn't make a lot of sense to me to not only not give him much attention, but to go away from him entirely and just put him into kind of a supportive almost role, or a hybrid role, or just a cast-off role. That's wasting your best strengths. It's a waste of talent. I mean, look at a team who's doing it right. Like, okay, Copenhagen Wolves is not a good team. It's very unlikely they're going to finish top 6 this season. But okay, you look at their team, the reason they do have chances to win and they can play well is because, okay, they know that their best player is their AD carry, by far. And they base things around him. They give him the resources, the champions, the ganks, the team approach, so that he at least can carry when it's possible for him to, whether it's an AD carry meta and whether it's tanks and all the rest of it or whatever. Now, in terms of doing this approach, I'd give the analogy, okay, if you have a Ferrari or some kind of premium sports car, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to be using that for just pulling a cart to market. That's not the right approach for using that thing. In fact, a Ferrari obviously is supposed to go very fast and all the rest of it. Now, in terms of the players and the resources that are being given to Forgiven at the moment, first of all, okay, there was one game that just, I don't even understand what's going on here, because there was one game where it makes sense, okay, in the first games, Edward was playing Thresh. That's exactly what we want. We want to give Forgiven a chance to have this lane presence. Then the Thresh bans came in, okay, understandable. But when the Thresh bans come in, there was a game versus H2K where Edward chose to play Lulu. Now, how is that going to allow dominance in the lane? What resource is that going to be that Forgiven can carry from? Seems quite unlikely, right? Now, admittedly, in this game, Thresh had been first picked away by H2K. It wasn't banned. But what is coming in place of the Thresh here? Like, where is the Annie? We know historically Edward was an Annie player. Hey, where is even something like Morgana? Where are these champions? We're not seeing them from Edward. So, okay, there's an issue in itself. We have seen some Nautilus this last week when they won a game on it. So, okay, that's something. But in general, they're not going super hard towards this style that presumably Forgiven envisioned, and that a lot of us envisioned as to be one of the potential best strengths of the team. Now, in terms of if they're going to take this approach of going away from Forgiven, well, if you're not going to give him the resources, you're not going to put him in position to be a carry, you're not even going to consider him your carry, then why even get Forgiven if you're Gambit? That's the part I don't get. Like, if you were just going to try and get this sort of a player, you'd have been better off recruiting Steel back. This would have been the player to recruit. Just get Steel back, make him like your bitch AD carry who just, all he has to do is play safe in lane, let the top lane carry, let mid lane do whatever it's doing, play whatever champs that are currently meta that'll be safe, get to the team fight and right-click champions and hope that you can do some damage. That's who you should have recruited. If you want to get Forgiven, it's a waste of time to have Forgiven in terms of his talents and the strengths he brings to your team if you don't use him as a primary component of the team. So, then there's the aspect of what champions from Forgiven play. And I don't know how the pick ban goes in their team or how they decide it. But in general, some of these champions seem like ones where either Forgiven is struggling to know in terms of if he's going to be playing 2v3, 2v4 all the time. Like, what can I even play now? Should I try playing stuff like Ashe? Should I go to Corki, which has been okay, actually? Should he go away? Obviously, at the moment, one of his main problems, I will say, is that he doesn't play Kalista. If I were him, I'd be spamming the fuck out of Kalista and get that into your champion pool. He doesn't play Draven either. That's not particularly a meta champion, but okay, he doesn't play that either. But okay, he's played some Lucian, and in general, it's not like that's always banned against him. There might be some. Lucian's one he can play. Obviously, Caitlyn isn't enabled at the moment, but if Caitlyn's there, okay, you can play Caitlyn as well when that comes up. There should be at least two that should be strong, classic Forgiven champions that could be played here. There's the issue, and this is one of the areas where I look at this dilemma, and I make the conclusion that I think they aren't going away towards Forgiven, is that he does seem to spend a lot of his life playing 2v3 and 2v4 in the bot lane. People just diving constantly, the jungler constantly having attention to ensure, even without a lot of the resources, that he can't get ahead. He can't do well. He won't win lane. Now, first and foremost, one aspect of this is that this comes from when Diamondprox is putting a lot of his attention top lane and trying to funnel kashad to be fed, to ensure he's safe laning, to ensure that his matchups work well and that he can get ahead. Or maybe even do lane swaps sometimes. That's one thing, okay. When you do that, that's going to make it so that it's harder and that Forgiven's living in this 2v3, 2v4 meta. But that's another aspect where you have to define how the decision you're making does the outcomes. If you're not giving Forgiven ganks, you're not giving him pressure bot, and he is playing 2v3 and 2v4, well then now, he doesn't get blamed. You shouldn't be blaming him now when he doesn't carry from bot lane, and when he can't do very well bot lane, because he's playing at a disadvantage. Not only that, but now the blame for not winning the game and not doing extremely well should now go to the player who receives the attention if you're not winning at the end. Because when Forgiven's not getting it, okay, that means there's a jungler and other players in his lane down here. Great. Well, you're already sending your jungler top lane, so top lane should now be getting massively ahead. He should be doing very well, or even mid lane should be getting ganks off and getting ahead. So now, if the game is not won and Gambit do not have carry players at the end of the game, they're the positions we're now looking at. They're the ones getting the resources. I'd also say this. One of the reasons I found kind of counterintuitive is if Forgiven's being dove 2v3, 2v4 over and over bot lane, and he's your strongest player, a very good AD carry, first of all, if you give jungle pressure to bot, well, apparently their jungler's going there all the time anyway. So it's going to cancel it out, and down there, you're going to ensure your AD carry's safe, and you're even going to help get counter ganks off and get those kills back when he gets killed. That's going to be positive. And if you've already got a strong carry top laner, ideal, he's now playing 1v1. The jungler's not there. If he's strong, he can play 1v1 anyway, and now we've got two lanes that can win or are winning. He doesn't necessarily need the ganks. Or you go the approach you're going right now, and you do give him the ganks there, and you leave that, you kind of jettison off the bot lane, in which case now the top lane must carry. Now he is the player. Now he's like Forgiven in SK, where people criticised him, rightfully so sometimes, when he didn't carry, when he had all the farm funneled into him, even sometimes some mid lane, and he had all the attention, all the picks, all the ganks. Well, now, in this world, now you better carry if you're kashad. Now you have to. That's it. And if you don't, you're the one who should be considered selfish. You're the one who should be get all the credit taken away from them and the blame. And even if you do sort of okay in a game that the team loses overall, you don't get maximum credit there. But that's not the way that it seems like Gambit think, and that's not the way that it seems like fans and people perceiving the lamp. They still look at Forgiven and go, well, he's a superstar, like obviously he is, and go, and therefore, if they lose, he's doing something wrong. He's not playing the right way. Now, follow this logic as well. So one of the reasons people would say it's not an AD carry meta at the moment is because tanks are so strong. It's another tank meta, isn't it? It's when the Cinderhulk came in along and changed the whole game for us. So tanks are too strong and the AD carry can't kill them down. So why put all your resources into an AD carry and let him win lane with a couple of kills? If that means he's still not going to have that much of a significant impact on the tanks, it'll be very hard to kill them. Well, again, let's follow that logic. If tanks are so strong in this sense, well then your tanks will also be very strong against the enemy AD carry, right? And he won't be able to kill them. Therefore, if you're playing in a world where you don't give Forgiven the resources, now your tanks, except Gambit rarely plays tanks, but you know what I mean? Now your tanks better carry. Now they better carry the whole game. It's their meta, remember? They're the ones who the enemy AD carry can't win. So again, why aren't you winning games if you're going this approach? What's interesting about the way this has all been defined and why I want to make this video is because if Forgiven was in that world previously, like SK, where he did make all these demands. He wanted this champion. He even tried to get a different support player. Apparently, that's what people say on the grapevine. He wanted the whole team to play around him, give him farm, let him carry the game. Yes, people said that's selfish. In a sense, it is. It's actually identifying your strengths and saying, right, we have to play around these strengths, which is what I want done in this video. But okay, people would say that's selfish if he demands to have these things, right? How is it not selfish for the other players in Gambit to have demands themselves that are the same demands, but they're just not called Forgiven? So if a top laner demands this focus, and the jungler demands that they give the focus to him, and they play this approach, and they let the bot lane go to shit, and they don't necessarily dominate the top lane, they don't win the game, that's not only selfish, but they're not succeeding, and they should actively be criticised for doing so. Now, in terms of Forgiven, if I was Forgiven, I wouldn't look at this situation and go, okay, right, it's going to shit. It's very unlikely Gambit's going to finish top 4, and obviously you have to finish like top 3 to. Well, actually, I guess you don't. I guess there's the qualifier at the end anyway. But it's very unlikely you're going to directly just win the split and get into Worlds. And in terms of circuit points, it's very likely you're just going to make it there off that. So really, that qualifies your last chance. And even then, it seems unlikely at the moment you're going to be the good enough team that's going to make it there. So you're probably not going to make it to Worlds, which is probably your main motivation. So it might be easy to A, give up hope, or B, think, right, I've just got to figure out a way to get some wins. So maybe you buy into that mentality. Oh, I'll play the meta that they're saying. It's not the AD carry meta. And you go towards this approach and you play champions that don't suit you, and you don't mind all the resources going away from you. I don't like this approach because, as I've described already, other people aren't judging your team fairly anyway. If you fail, they're going to say, right, you suck, you couldn't carry, even if you weren't given resources. And they'll even look at the player like kashad if he does well in losses and go, oh, but he was a shining star. Actually, he was much better than you. So actually, you won't get the wins at the moment, and you won't get the credit anyway. So if I was someone like Vivian, I'd say, fuck it, kick me if you want, go get a fucking steel back type guy. You either play my approach or that's it. My way or the highway. Like, you're going to play this approach and I am going to carry the game because I am good enough. And if you give me these supports and you give me Edward on these strike champions, I'm going to bully the lane. I'm going to do well, even if it's not this AD carry meta. Because the best players really are capable of doing that. And also, by the way, if then you don't succeed, then maybe you can ask questions to yourself like, hey, maybe I'm not as good as I thought I was. Maybe I'm meta dependent. Maybe I need certain champions. Then you'll at least know. Whereas at the moment, by acquiescing everything to these other teammates, you're not in a position to do that anyway. If Gambit really buy into that idea, not only in terms of the meta, but thinking like, oh, well, the reason why also you have to let someone else carry is because it's a team game, everyone has to give up sacrifices and all that sort of thing. That just gives me brain cancer, man. Because if you have someone like Uzi in your team, if you have someone like Deft in your team, you don't tell Deft and Uzi that we're going to let this other lane carry, except in some of their cases they had very good players. But okay, if there's a weaker player in one of those other lanes, you don't take your biggest strength and say, I'm not going to use this. Instead, I'm going to take something that isn't a strength of mine. And because for other teams that have a strength there, it's extremely good, I'm going to put all my focus here. That's not a good approach. You make the best of the strengths that you have in your team. Even in the NBA, you could use the same logic, okay? So the meta over the last few years has been actually to go to perimeter players because of how the rules work in terms of being able to draw fouls very easily now, in terms of everyone being small ball. You got a lot of fast ball handling players and you can move the ball a lot, get open shots. And so the meta in general has been to go to these perimeter players. Yet you look at certain teams where their strength wasn't that. So LeBron mega developed his post game and became dominating there and constantly goes inside all the time, even though in general he's a perimeter player. Sometimes he's actually played like small forward and power forward for the Heat in the past. Or you look at a team like the Memphis Grizzlies were a great example, a very good team. All their strengths were down low with Marc Gasol, with Zach Randolph, and they were dominating in that sense as well. Actually, by being the strength that isn't the main meta thing, you become a weird sort of counter to the overall meta approach, especially people in the meta approach who haven't got strengths at the meta positions but are playing that meta style, because your style is going to in some way counter that, and it will just work best for you if you stick around your style. That's a general point about League of Legends. champions. But I feel as though in this Gambit case, it's quite significant actually in terms of the way they're thinking of it, the way fans are thinking of it, and the way people might think of the solution, which is again, Forgiven's not doing well, so get him off any carry champions, put him on the supportive champions, put him on Sivir, put him on stuff like that, and just have kashad carry, just have Gambit give Diamond give all his attention top. In terms of the players on the team, listen, for kashad, I don't have any criticisms whatsoever. Now, admittedly, if they don't succeed, then he will have been the selfish player. But if he thinks he's that good, and he is a good player, he's like a top 3 or 4, probably top 3 top laner in Europe. The problem is he's not at his position at the stature that Forgiven is. So I would say in a weird way, if he wants to win, he shouldn't always demand that. Like some games he can do it, but he should also understand that this is a Forgiven team, that he's going to have to work around that to a degree and sometimes give up some resources, but play excellent 1v1 anyway, especially if the other jungler isn't there, as I'm describing, if you put the pressure bottom lane. That's one thing. I don't put a lot of blame on kashad. I understand why strong players like Forgiven should want to have the resources put into them so that they can then carry. You don't want to put your whole career and life in someone else's hands, especially someone you don't trust because they're not good enough at their position, and then have them fail. That's not a good position to be in. It's going to be a bad scenario for everyone. But the player that really confuses me in this lineup is actually Diamond Prox. Because when I look at Diamond Prox, I've always thought what was brilliant about Diamond Prox is this is a player who has the will to win. This is a player who will do anything in this game to try and win. Now, admittedly, yes, he has some crazy innovations. It was never as far as like a Genja way, though, where he'd pick something sometimes to even spite his own approach and maybe lose the game. It felt like he was always looking for very strong things to then dominate from his strengths. And I always figured he was a guy who winning was everything to him. You've seen the look on his face when they had the slumps, when they had the losses, when he was about to get subbed out in that summer season last year. I always thought, right, this is a guy who understands that he has to do what it takes to win. In this particular case, why is he seemingly so determined that he has to go top lane? I mean, if he must be a key voice in the team. If he said, right, we're going to give pressure to Forgiven and we're going to figure out, depending on the game and the matchup, whether to give kashad the attention, whether to give Forgiven, not just always be giving it to kashad. In this world, why is Diamond Prox somehow not working on the side of Forgiven here? Why doesn't he look and identify who the best player in his team is and how he as the jungler, who has a key role in this, can get him ahead and ensure he doesn't get pounced on and ensure he has the chance to carry the game, and then also figure out how to work with the top lane? Why is he going this one route? That in itself is kind of a bit perplexing to me. So yeah, in general, I thought this was a general topic I'd make because it's been very tricky to pick apart the Gambit things and look at where the problems are, what they could do differently, and how they're going to turn this around. And so I don't know if they can become a top team. That's a long way away. But I do know that one of the first things I would do if I was the coach is I'd look at the personnel I have, and then I would build based on my strengths. Then I would add in meta elements, but I would build based on my core strengths, and that would be the structure, the process from which I think the success is going to come. Not necessarily just copying the meta and doing what other teams that having the most success do. Because, for example, okay, let's say you do look at two other teams that are having a lot of success right now, so Origin and Fnatic. Well, you could make a very strong case that the two best players on both Origin and Fnatic are already their top laner and mid laner. So if that's the sort of meta we're in, they already have the pieces to do that style and to be very, very good with it. In the past, Fnatic's worst player was their AD carry last split. And okay, Niels isn't the worst. Well, I guess you can make a case for him being the worst player. Statistically, he's definitely not. He's been doing very, very well. But at the moment, also, he plays certain champions that dominate that meta. So anyway, that's some general points there.